And welcome to the Jameel Rawls show. And what I want to go over quickly with people is forensic psychology. And one of the ways I got into forensic psychology was studying old police reports and old, like basically conspiracies from the 50s, 60s, and 70s, primarily the 60s. And I noticed when researching detectives and looking for detectives, I would look for detectives that were like crack shot detectives, and I would just study everything they did. And if I could find old interviews with them or old interviews they did with their suspects, I would really zoom in and listen on it. And I found some interesting things. One of the things I found is how at a crime scene, how people will leave false clues. Like, say you have a crime scene, somebody might leave behind a pair of glasses or leave behind a wallet or something like that to throw off investigators. Or they could leave, say you have a body, they could put a false ID in the wallet or purse or whatever of the individual to throw people off. So they would think, well, this is the body of Frank yada 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 from Florida. In reality, that's not who it is. They just left behind it. And so I started zooming in on these sort of details, and I would find detectives that were used to studying like professional criminals, like hard, like really intelligent like criminals, and it was interesting. And I came across forensic psychology, and I have been doing some research recently in the last few weeks on forensic psychology again. And one of the things I came across that was interesting was offender profiling, and that had to do with the DC sniper attacks. And it was interesting how profilers had a really difficult time figuring out who the DC snipers were, or was it, if even it was a DC sniper, maybe it wasn't, who knows. But forensic psychologists had a very interesting time trying to zoom in and figure out who these individuals were. And you have forensic psychology, then you have a criminologist, you have homicide detectives, you have self-taught profilers, and then you have, of course, FBI profilers. But at the end of the day, what a good investigator wants to do is get the profile. That's it. What is the makeup of the individual doing it, individual or individuals doing this? Okay. And then you look at where and when did the activity occur, where and when was the alleged crime committed, motive. What would be the motive? Investigative analysis, investigative psychology, diagnostic evaluation, crime action profiling, and behavioral science. And you can teach yourself this sort of thing. Like I just said, behavioral science. That reminded me. You have naval investigators, naval investigations, and things. You can just, as a conspiracy researcher, if you actually got into this sort of like researching a particular subject, you could just spend hours and hours and hours and hours getting old police reports, old documents, and you could just literally just teach yourself off the top of your head. You really don't have to go to school for it. And then you look at an organized offender or a disorganized offender. And so by analyzing a crime scene or analyzing an event, you say, was this organized or disorganized? Or was it meant to look disorganized? And it really was organized. And then that gets in what we were talking about earlier about false clues, reconstruction of a crime scene. So, I think a lot of people who go through university, go through college, and they want to learn to be an investigator, and they get into policing research. One of the things they have to do is reconstruct the crime scene. Well, what did it look like when it happened? Take me back to that moment in time. Then you look for, of course, a signature, an emotional link. Was this a crime of passion? Is there some sort of vibe around here of an emotional link? How was this victim connected to the crime? Like when you study serial murders, you can see how some perpetrators will purposely cover their victim up. And when I used to study and research into a scenario, I'd think, well, if they covered the individual up, that's a sign of guilt, or maybe they lived maybe the perpetrator or perpetrators lived in the area, and so they put some, you know, leaves or something over the person, you know, or hit them some behind a building or something like that as a sign of guilt, or they live in the area so they want it to be. Versus if somebody doesn't live in the area and they live far away, they might not care. Like, you know, who gives a, you know, that type of thing. Then you look at crime scene details and notes. Expressive, impulsive, instrumental, opportunistic, instrumental, cognitive, geographic profiling in the area, the familiarity, again, of the area. And then if it's then you can see if it's a group of people doing it, if it's not just, because oftentimes like a case like Jack the Ripper, people actually think Jack the Ripper was just one person, and I don't really believe that. I think Jack the Ripper, I think there was a group of people doing the Jack the Ripper, doing the Jack the Ripper killings, and you can see the intelligence behind the activity was very hostile. And you got to look at, you know, so whether it's one individual or a group of individuals, you look at the behavior of the activity. You know, I look at the hostility within these individuals. And I like using that hostile intelligence. That's an intelligence term, actually. Like back during the Cold War, they'd say, is there any hostile intelligence in the area? You know? If you get into foreign intelligence, you'll be able to solve a cop case like it ain't nothing. If you study foreign intelligence, you'd be able to crack some street BS in no time. Okay, so this is interesting. The reason why this type of stuff is interesting to me, because it teaches you more about yourself. The more you get to understand individuals, the more you get to understand the motives of individuals and how individuals behave in society, the more you understand yourself. And I think a lot of people have a great misinterpretation of people who study conspiracies. Like I formally studied conspiracies for years, and I've been in all the, you know, holistic, like hippie-ish meditation type stuff. And I really truly believe people have a great misinterpretation of that. They think people who study conspiracies are crazy, or they're not in context with stuff. In reality, people who study conspiracies have a really good leading edge on the rest of the country, because they're not going to get pulled off of a case. Their boss, if they, you know, like at a police department, you know, they can pull the officer off the case. You know, in conspiracy research, who's going to pull you off the case? Nobody. So I think people have a great misinterpretation. But this stuff is cool. This stuff gets into the old reading like Sherlock Holmes books. Again, the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I think that's one of my favorite investigative investigative agencies that I've come across. It was established during the Civil War. At one time, the Pinkerton Detective Agency had more detectives than the Union during the Civil War. You can imagine that. Imagine during the Civil War, imagine all the people working for the Union, the northern states. Now imagine this. The Pinkerton Detective Agency had more people working for it than the Union had working for them. So the Pinkerton Detective Agency was a gigantic agency. And the Rangers. You know what? The Texas, remember that TV show, Texas Walker Ranger? The funny thing is, like, I guess back in the day, the Rangers were pretty ruggish. They were like the old school G-men that went after, like, Bonnie and Clyde and Pretty Boy Floyd and all that stuff. And they had the Tommy guns, and they just hunt people down and kill them. But the Texas Rangers actually use a lot of science. If you came across a real Texas Ranger in today's world, it's been like the last 20, 30 years, they're going to be basically scientists. And so if you look at some cases at the Walker Rangers, the Texas Rangers, that'll teach you a lot. What's the name of that movie? What's the name of that movie where that guy, he's in Texas and he's being hunted? No Country for Old Men. No Country for Old Men. That type of. Then you mix parapsychology with this stuff, you're really off the hook. If somebody took all this, put all their emphasis into becoming their own profiler and doing their own research, and they added parapsychology and used ESP and went to psychics and stuff and astrologists and Kabbalists and numerologists, oh my God, you'd be a bad mofo. Now that gets into occult investigations. You would graduate. You would be looked at upon as being an occult investigate. You say, man, call that guy in. He's going to come in. Don't let nobody know we're calling him in, but call him in. And then you can get into some interesting stuff, man, of doing your own research. You can come, but I would advise people not to talk about it. One thing, people who are investigators, work for the cops, they have the protection of the cops, you know what I mean? So I'd advise people not to come on YouTube and explain too much about a particular subject they're looking into. They feel it's going to be, if they feel they're going to be endangered. That's why I always look at subjects that were as old as possible. Like Jack the Ripper, you know, I say. But you can get into some like the Ponzi scheme. Most people have never heard of a Ponzi scheme before. That's interesting stuff, Ponzi scheme. A Ponzi scheme, or a pyramid scheme. A Ponzi scheme is a form of a fraud that lures investors and pays profits to earlier investors with funds from more recent investors. The scheme leads to fix them. So you come across some interesting. Pyramid scheme. This stuff's cool. Paranormal investigator. Now that's something I've always been interested in, paranormal investigations. Like the poltergeist. Yeah, but you can teach yourself everything you want to know. I would recommend to people, again, people who are interested now in doing research and studying and just finding little cool stuff, to just go back and research old cases. Like you can start off in the 30s, 40s, police reports, court transcripts, anything in the news, the media, and just do your independent research and come up with your own angles. I never take what somebody says at face value. If somebody, I don't care who they are, I don't care if it's the president of the United States. I don't, unless I've actually researched it myself. I just don't go for it. Paranormal investigation. Okay, and this is the Jameel Rawls Show, and that's forensic psychology.